Well, hi everyone. Welcome to season 2 of QLF's webinar series, Voices of QLF, this time focusing on conservation in Belize. Please note that this 1-hour episode is being recorded and will be posted on QLF's website. In the interest of time, there will not be a question and answer segment, but rather a conversation among our panelists. And now our president, Beth Alling, will kick us off.
Thank you, Brent, and welcome everyone. Wonderful to have you here. The Central American country of Belize is a conservation success story and role model for climate and biodiversity conservation. While not without challenges, public, private, and not-for-profit organizations have formed alliances to engage local communities and especially indigenous peoples, balance economic development and conservation, and share stewardship of the country's biologically diverse protected lands and marine resources. And now may I ask that our 5 panelists unmute your video and audio. Wonderful. We're waiting for one more to show up, and that will be any minute, I'm sure. It is a great pleasure and honor to introduce our guests today. Joining us from Belize, Will Maheia, founder of the Toledo Institute for Development and Environment, TIDE, and conservation activist. Eddie Romero, executive director, program for Belize, and Nellie Catzim, consultant on oceans governance for the Pew Charitable Trusts. We deeply regret that Celia Mahang, executive director of TIDE, is not able to be with us on this episode today due to unforeseen circumstances. While not the same without Celia, our panelists will wave the flag for her and thank you, Nellie, for accepting this assignment at the 11th hour. There are 2 other guests who over decades have dedicated their lives to regional and global conservation and stewardship initiatives, beginning with QLF's International Conservation Exchange programs. It is a great honor to have with us Jessica Brown, former QLF Senior Vice President of International Programs and current Executive Director of the New England Biolabs Foundation, and Brent Mitchell, QLF Senior Vice President. Next, Jessica, could you please provide us with a brief overview of QLF's work with alumni and partner organizations in Belize over the years? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here and to see dear friends and colleagues from Belize. So yeah, a brief history of QLF's long partnership and relationship with that amazing country really goes back to the early mid 1990s when QLF launched a fellowship program for conservation professionals from Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, Brent, who's here, and I had joined the QLF staff back in the mid 80s and did so after years of working in the Caribbean region. So we knew the Caribbean basin well, but we were really excited to build on some of those early exchanges between QLF and some work in the Caribbean to a broader region of Latin America and the Caribbean, and to reach mid-career conservation leaders, community leaders, a broader range of folks. So that regional fellowship program grew, and it did so with support from donors like the Oak Foundation and the Maheia Fund, which really stuck with QLF, stuck with the program, which was so important. And in the course of that collaboration regionally, Belize really began to stand out. And well, we had early Belizean participation in the early 90s, I think in earnest, really, with Will Maheia, who is with us today, founder of TIDE, when Will participated in our annual fellowship in 1999 as one of the very first fellows from Belize. Celia Mahang came to New England as a fellow a few years later, when shortly after she had succeeded Will as the director of TIDE. And again, Nellie Catzim, who is with us today, was on the 2011 fellowship, one of, I think, 4 Belizeans that year. And she was also part of a local leader study tour from Belize the following year. And there are many other fellowships and exchanges that could be mentioned, but I obviously their time doesn't permit. early on in the program, we began to see some really deep commonalities between the Atlantic region and Belize, and that was particularly evident in the challenges of marine resource management. And that led us to launch something we called the Gulf to Gulf Exchange, and that linked marine conservation professionals, community leaders, lobster fishers from the Gulf of Maine with those in the Gulf of Honduras. And that exchange spawned some lasting collaboration among many of the local leaders who participated both in Belize and also in places like Maine. And we also saw the value of holding alumni retreats every year. These provided an opportunity for the fellowship alumni to build relationships among themselves and within their own network of QLF fellows from their own country, but also more broadly. So that was another aspect of our collaboration with Belize. Going back to early days of Belizean participation in the QLF fellowship program, it quickly became evident the potential for private land stewardship tools. And we've subsequently seen, and we'll be hearing more from Eddie, Will, and others about how privately protected areas have really taken off. That's one example, but in this and many other ways, the fellowship provided early ideas and impetus for Belizean participants. But it was so impressive to see how they took this inspiration back home and turned it into action. And again, we'll be hearing more about it from our Belizean colleagues. In the ensuing years, there have been all different kinds of collaboration layered alongside and on top of the fellowship program. Brent can talk about this more, but they include in-country capacity building on specific topics that such as training for how to use GIS for conservation planning, and strategic planning workshops with organizations like the Tri-National Gulf of Honduras Alliance, or TRIGO, Sardinia Alliance for Conservation and Development in the north of Belize, but also activities that were aimed at finding ways to connect the work in Belize to the broader world. And that's included, for example, getting QLF alumni to major international convenings, such as the World Parks Congress in 2003, which I believe Greg Choke participated, the one in 2014. Celia was there along with a very large Belizean delegation, as I recall, and also the IUCN World Conservation Congress. And Nellie, who was here, was involved in the IUCN Congress in 2012 and probably in subsequent ones, but I know this was something where QLF had a hand. And also getting the word out in publications with a broad readership, such as a paper in the journal that IUCN puts out called Parks that focused on governance of protected areas in Belize. There's lots more to say about the whole array of activities. I want to mention the vantage point that I now get to watch that growth and development has been since 2009 as executive director of the New England Biolabs Foundation. We fund in Belize as part of an overall grant making focus in the Gulf of Honduras region. And so I've had the opportunity to stay in touch with so many of these organizations. And that's been such a pleasure, and to engage in some complementary capacity building workshops, such as the Creative Action Institute's trainings in creative methods that many of the Belizean colleagues have also participated in. So that's a little bit of a thumbnail, and hopefully from that we can jump into the questions. Thanks so much, Beth.
Thank you, Jessica. That's just wonderful. Appreciate it. All right, let's move on to our first discussion and hear about your QLF experience and impact or perhaps influence on your professional life, your career. And I'd love to start with you, Will. Just need you to unmute your audio. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Beth. Jessica, good to see you as usual, and all the other panelists. I thank you guys for the invitation for sure. I think that being involved with QLF at an early stage when TIDE was just getting going, the Toledo Institute for Development and Environment, TIDE, the trip up to New England definitely gave me a lot of perspectives and helped me to really kind of like guide tide into where it's at today, or up to where when I left. But I mean, things like conservation easements, those were new terminology for Belize. I always remember that in Belize, when we talk about that easement, it means giving you the passage through someone's private land. As you know, we are a former British colony. We have a lot of British laws we have adopted. So conservation easement was new term for us in a way. So that was one thing. Definitely, I know that when I came back from New England, from QLF headquarters up there, with all the tours and stuff, that was something I was really excited about, to get going in Belize and to introduce it and to get people to know that what you can have an easement on your land. It didn't only mean that somebody could walk through your land or pass through your land, but you could have a conservation easement to conserve the natural resources on your land in perpetuity. So that was definitely exciting. So I brought that back, and visiting, I think a great experience for me was to visit several of the other land trusts and conservation organizations in New England, and exchanging with those guys up there, help me and help Belize in a whole to really adapt some of the success stories from New England and bring it home here to Punta Gorda. So it was like a really great experience, one that, we'll never forget. And yeah, it was great overall.
Thanks so much. And I'd like to go to you, Eddie, if you could tell us about your experience with QLF and how that may have impacted your career.
Sure, thanks. It's a pleasure, and thanks for inviting me also for this webinar. We're so happy to share. In terms of the QLF experience, in my case, it has been more on the ground training and workshops and support, particularly from Brent coming to Belize and working with us, doing training and developing strategies for networking and in support of general protected areas management, and particularly for promoting private protected areas management. Certainly, I founded the Association of Protected Areas Management Organization, and through that, we've been able to influence the government to establish the co-management agreement, and also to amend the legislation dealing with protected areas to the point that now there is in the legislation provisions for officially recognizing privately protected areas. That was not the case before. So when we established the Rio Bravo Conservation and Management Area, we basically had to break ground, going to the Ministry of Economic Development, forming a trust agreement to establish a reserve of 110,000 acres, which has now grown to 250,000 acres. And lately, a new reserve was declared, which is the Belize Maheia Forest Trust. That's another 230,000 acres. So the extent of the area covered with forests continuously is now almost 500,000 acres. And certainly the training and the experience we got with QLF has helped us be able to reach to that level, basically promoting privately protected areas as a tool for protecting biodiversity, natural resources in Belize. It is very important. At a more local level, we have also received training in personal performance, which is very critical when we grow. Currently, we have 35 employees. During the pre-COVID times, we were at 55. And so it's fairly big for us. And as you enter, not having a human resource development person dedicated to that, you enter into issues with personnel. And normally, one tends to just terminate employment when you have issues. But with performance targets, then we're able to discuss with staff and place performance targets and make sure that the staff improve performance instead of just terminating them. So that has been a good experience we got from the training and exchanges we got from QLF, particularly to Brent Mitchell.
Thanks so much. It doesn't seem as though Nellie is on the webinar yet.
Yeah, Beth, she is running another webinar that's going a little bit long. That's how we live these days. But she sent a note. She should be on soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brent. All right, let's keep moving forward. And I'd like to talk about community engagement and your experience engaging communities and indigenous peoples through educational programs, activity, and advocacy for effective conservation. So Will, can we return to you to comment on community engagement, why that's so important in your work and has been for so long?
Yeah, well, I always tell people, you know, I'm born and raised here in this community. I'm not going anywhere. I've seen the depletion of the natural resources over the years, and we as a community have to do something about it. We're not like in the developed world where somebody will come in and buy a huge tract of land and put basically a fence around it, and that's it. Here we have to integrate the community into the conservation efforts. I always say there cannot be any conservation if there's no economic development. At the end of the day, we use these resources to live off of and to eat and drink before conservation. So when conservation comes in, it must be a part of the equation. So being from this area, it would be hard for me to go and say, hey, this area is under conservation and nobody can walk there anymore. You can't hunt or fish there anymore. So bringing in the sustainable development part of it and, you know, realizing that, yeah, there are some parts that we have to put aside so that we could, like, you know, study that for science purposes. But at the same time, we have to provide a sustainable alternative for our people who use these resources. So while we were making like management plans, for example, for the Port Honduras Marine Reserve, it wasn't just like about going to a town hall and say, hey, we're having a meeting, because by this time, you know, as we were being basically invaded not only by the evangelicals, but also by the conservationists, everybody coming from the north and trying to tell us what to do to conserve and how we got to do it. So we had to really find a balance there. And sometimes there were times when people were getting tired of meetings because everybody wanted to have a meeting. So one strategy we used was to meet the people on their turf. So we would go to the fish market and have maybe a focus group meeting there, or we'd even go to the football field, or we'll go to the church and meet the people there after church or before church, or to the bar, you know, and we strike up the conversations there and get people excited and, you know, getting involved. I know one of the things that's still going on today, which is more than 20 years now, is how we integrated sports into conservation. We had a football tournament, and for you guys up north, it'll be a soccer tournament. And for you to qualify, most people pay an entrance fee to get into the tournament. No, with us now, for you to qualify to be a part of that tournament, was that you had to, your football team, which have fans, would then have to have a conservation program, whether it be a river cleanup, a beach cleanup, a reforestation in the riparian zone, something related to conservation, and a prize would be given for that. So it wasn't only about winning the football game, but also about doing good conservation project. And we found that that was very, very successful. I mean, it was like, you know, heartwarming to go up the river and seeing a sign that was put up by the Jacintoville Football Club. You know, you don't usually see that in other parts. But here you have players who are now involved in conservation efforts, you know, so they were winning because they get an opportunity to play in an organized league and at the same time involved with conservation initiatives. So that was really, really good. And this program was so successful at one time. Almost half the football team, the Belize national football team, had players who were involved in conservation efforts. So that was really like a good story there. And we continue to do that. You know, you go, and if you're in you'll have the games in a community, and you'd identify how can we help this community from an environmental standpoint, doing environmental education, reaching out to the players and to the players' families and to the fans, and have them go ahead and be ambassadors for the conservation effort and talking it up. So that was really, you know, something that when it comes to integrating the community into conservation that we had practiced, and I think it's still practiced today. It's important to have the community involved in decision makings, whether it's this conservation or anything else. But also when it comes to conservation, there must be a sustainable development aspect to it, because we just can't lock up everything. We have to use it, and we have to use it wisely. Like one of the things in the Port Honduras Marine Reserve that speaks for itself on the effective management, and to Eddie up in a program for Belize too. And I know sometimes, like in Belize, I get into a lot of trouble, as you know, but by pointing out the facts that you'll have private protected area like Eddie's in Rio Bravo or in the Port Honduras Marine Reserve, where there's so much more today than there were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You could go into Rio Bravo right now, and there's almost a guarantee you'll see wildlife. You could go into Port Honduras Marine Reserve, and there's guarantee you'll catch food. While now, on the government side, you go into their protected areas, a national park and stuff that they manage fully, and you could hardly see a wildlife because the management is not as effective. So I don't want to really, like, you know, go so deep into their ineffective management, but I think if you do a comparison, you'll see where conservation efforts like what program for Belize is so much more effective than what they're doing in the national parks. So yeah.
Yeah, talking about communities and indigenous peoples, tomorrow, the 19th of November, is celebrated as Garifuna Settlement Day here in Belize, when Garifunas arrived in Belize for the first time. And so it's a public and bank holiday. And you join that with cruise ship tourism, and you have a lot of Garifuna music going on today in Belize these days. So if you hear that that sound and that music today, that's what's coming from here in Belize City.
And Eddie, you should let folks know the Garifuna is a unique culture that that came from the Eastern Caribbean and settled along the coast of Belize and Honduras.
Yes, yeah. And they have a deep culture with the coasts and fisheries and things like that.
Yeah.
So Belize, as was mentioned before, is blessed that our population is still small. We have about 430,000 people living in the country, that small population has enabled the country to keep its natural resources well protected. 60% of the terrestrial area is still kept under natural forest cover. 40% of the terrestrial area is under some form of protection. In the marine area, it's 15% of the marine area is under some form of protection. But the country also has a high level of poverty. We have, pre-COVID, it was 40% poverty level. With COVID, it's even more. I'm not sure what's the official figure right now, but definitely it's even more. The country has a high level of unemployment, which was worsened by COVID. And so and there's a high level of debt. So the government is seriously challenged in providing the services of the country for the people. And so when you have a context like that, just locking forest is not seen as the best solution, while we recognize that the conservation of biodiversity, natural resources, and water in particular, water is needed for life, it's very important. The people has to be taken into consideration. Certainly with a high level of poverty, you cannot talk about conservation with people that, and especially children that are on a hungry stomach. So we have to look at conservation and the people, and that's what we followed with Program for Belize Revival Conservation and the Management area. So it's an area that was privately owned. We purchased it, but there was no management presence there. And so people were doing logging, people were doing hunting, and some people were even farming within the private lands. And so when we took it as a private protected area, we had to, we adopted a moral commitment to work and support the communities in sustainable development. We work with them, create awareness. We visit the schools a lot, community groups, and we try to develop projects that are sustainable. In our case, we employ, most of our employees come from the community. So the protected area provide benefits to them. We develop ecotourism, sustainable forestry that provides benefits to the communities, employments to the communities. And the ecotourism also involves communities in the enterprise. And in addition to that, we provide training that help them. We've trained a lot of people that have become some of the excellent tour guides in the country, especially with birding and natural resources. And we also provide high school scholarship because the opportunities are limited in the communities around the protected area. We have to do that in order to build the support from the communities for the reserve. One, we want them to understand the importance and how we are managing the reserve, and to build the support so that they reduce the pressures on the reserve. If we don't do that, the pressures will increase instead of reduce, and we won't be getting the support. Working more directly with indigenous communities, we work with communities in the South, for example, in Toledo. There's a group that's called the Kicheha group. The name is in Maheia. They are trying to manage their forests, and with our expertise in forest management, we provided training, help them develop their plans of operation and those kinds of things. We realized that working with the communities, it's with the indigenous people, it's different than working with other communities, because you have to understand their culture, their tradition, the way they make their decision-making process, which takes longer, and therefore it's more expensive to do. But we were able to build the capacity for them to do their own operation and benefit from the communities. They are more democratic in a way. And the same thing with the red bank scarlet macaws. By the way, that's a project that has protected the scarlet macaws because people were killing them. And we provided training, awareness, and ecotourism opportunities. And so they are now protecting the scarlet macaws. All they need now is people to visit. By the way, the country is open for visitation. The scarlet macaws come to Red Bank Village December, January, and February, if anybody would like to visit them.
I would.
Sign me up. I'd love to jump in with just another example, and I'm so glad that you shared these examples of, balancing conservation, livelihoods, bringing people in, and Will, the football example is great. I love the name Freshwater Cup for the prize. I always thought that was such a creative way to engage people, and it's amazing to realize that it's now in its 20th year. Number of grantees of the New England Biolabs Foundation, which not surprisingly overlap with a number of the alumni of QLF's fellowship program. There's a very specific universe of conservation NGOs in Belize, given the scale of the country. So many are doing really creative community engagement work. And one other example that hasn't been touched on yet is several organizations are doing some kind of version of community rangers and citizen science. Tide has something called the Community Stewards Program that I know Celia would have been telling us about if we were here. Yashe Conservation Trust has a community ranger program where really train rangers in using community people. And many of them, of course, in the case of Yashe Conservation Trust, are Catzim Maya and perhaps also Mopan Maya, I'm not sure, from that terrestrial protected area, the Maya landscape, but they are learning these kinds of skills in camera traps and handheld GIS. And another really interesting effort is up in Sartaneja, in Sartaneja Alliance for Conservation Development. Joel Verde was a QLF fellow many years ago, but they also have a wonderful community ranger program working with youth. And Sartaneja has a fishing village with, I think, probably very high levels of poverty and unemployment, and engaging these young people in the ranger program provides them with skills, but has also motivated quite a few of them to finish high school and even go on to the nearby junior college. So these are some really, I think, creative strategies for community engagement that I just wanted to mention.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. That's wonderful. And Will, I just want to turn to you while we're on the subject of economic development and conservation, and how does an NGO balance economic development and conservation, in particular, Tide?
Yeah, I think providing the alternative to these communities and empowering the stakeholders to really buy into the conservation efforts by having them benefit directly from the resources. I mean, one of the big, when we first started, this was 20 something years ago, people didn't even know what fly fishing was. And now it's the biggest income generator, I would say, for Punta Gorda town. And this is all conservation related. Most fishermen did not have a 4-stroke engine on their boats before now. And as a result of conservation and integrating the economic development, they could afford to put a 4-stroke engine. I mean, you have, I would say, in the Toledo district, fly fishing guides or fly fishing are the best paid guides in district for sure. And how do we balance that with Tide? I think that those fishermen guides do know now that without the fish, they have no job. So it's in their best interest to protect it as well. So they also help to protect the areas. As you know, governments complain globally about, the resources are too thin for them to do all these enforcements or all the patrols. But when you have people benefiting from it directly and see the big picture, they too then become a ranger to a certain extent. So we just have to keep on coming up with economic benefits. At the end of the day, human beings are human beings. We live in this society where we'll always want more. And we have to do it in a sustainable way. We have to find a sustainable way of doing it.
Great, thanks so much. And now Nellie Catzim has just joined us. Welcome, Nellie. I'm so glad you're here. We all are so glad you're here. And I think we'll just backtrack for a bit now that you've been able to join, and ask you to tell us about your QLF experience and perhaps any impact that may have had on your career, your professional life. Welcome.
Hi, yes, thank you, Liz. And hi, nice to see such friendly faces. It's been such a long time. Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share. When I got this invitation and was asked to share a little bit, I thought, well, I could just go on and on, but I'll just be very pointed. My experience with QLF and all of my interactions have been amazing. I really met Brent and Jessica and the QLF family early when I started in marine conservation. My years of experience in conservation in general is, I will not bother to say because it will age me, but it's been a while. But in terms of marine conservation, it's been, a little bit shorter. And I then had the privilege to be connected with the QLF family. And that really provided for me a strong foundation. It allowed me to build a very strong network among conservation enthusiasts, people who are passionate for conservation. And that really encouraged me throughout my career. I think, as Beth may have mentioned earlier, I am still working, in the ocean space. And so I feel like that network has really allowed me to just become stronger in terms of my interaction in the ocean space. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you tell us all about your career, just briefly, if you could?
Sure. So I've been working in the conservation field for, like I said, a long time. I've gone from being a very technical person working in the field at technical level in conservation to fortunately being the executive director of a small NGO in southern Belize that really focused on marine protected areas management. And from there, my career has really taken me into both the climate change space as well as ocean governance, moving into a regional entity, the Caribbean regional entity responsible for climate change. And that then led me to the international or global space where I worked with the Association of Small Island Developing States, looking at both the climate change negotiations at the United Nations, as well as ocean governance at the UN. So that's been pretty much what I've been working on for the past 7 years. And I am now back working in ocean governance at a regional level and within CARICOM.
Good. Thanks so much. I have a question for Brent and Jessica, and it has to do with these exchanges which go both ways. And what is the impact of this work that you've done for decades in Belize in particular? And what is the personal and professional impact on your lives?
And I'm gonna let you jump in first and I'll come.
Well, I think the benefits go both ways. We characterize our programs as exchanges, and we get as good as we give. So we've been able to bring back to the Atlantic region some of the lessons of what folks have done in Belize and other countries, and it also inspires us to hear what folks, the stories that you're hearing today, help us get past the challenges that we all know we face. But
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. That's definitely a deep question to ponder in this moment, and all the more so because I described in my thumbnail and just kind of realized, this goes back 2 decades, right? And even more. My math is good. It's more like 25 years of watching and sharing. And I definitely would sort of highlight what Brent has said about the two-way exchange and two-way learning on so many levels. And that became evident to us early on, but all the more so when we started having the opportunity to go to Belize when we were doing some of the alumni retreat workshops, and for me subsequently in my work with the New England Biolabs Foundation, and watch the progress over time. I feel like I'm always learning. I'm always learning from the innovation by our partners. I'm also, and this was going to be a comment towards the end, but I'll share it now in this moment that we're in, where we're all learning to live, or we need to be learning to live in a more tolerant and embracing way of different cultures, different ways of seeing the world, different linguistic groups, different races. And Belize is an incredible example of that. I know it's not perfect, but the multicultural setting of Belize, and we've talked briefly about the Garifuna people as an example, but a place where you have English as the official language, but Spanish in so many corners of Belize, Creole, Quechua Maya, Mopan Maya, Garifuna language, and all the cultures that go with that. And the opportunity to be in a place where people are figuring out how to live together and work together has so much to teach us in this moment in our country. So that's for me a big one. And finally, it's the relationships. You know, it was only maybe 3 years ago, Nellie, that you and I collaborated in a session where you spoke about climate change to a donor group, the Biodiversity Funders Group. Just before the pandemic, we were lucky to see Will and spend some time seeing his work in Punta Gorda, and also was on a boat with Celia traveling to Rio Sarstún, or Barra Sarstún in Guatemala in that same week. So the relationships continue, and that's had a profound impact, I think, certainly on my life, I think on our family's life as well.
Yes, for sure.
And I might just add quickly that my career is similar to what Nellie described. It's had an arc of going from being a field biologist to now up in the stratosphere working on global conservation instruments. And it just makes such a difference to have had the experience of knowing what these, you know, high-minded, ambitious conservation objectives actually mean on the ground in a place like Belize.
Thanks so much.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah, I just want to say, like, you know, having the experience of working with Jessica and Brent, and I'm getting a little distracted here because those chickens are going off outside here, but you can tolerate. Yeah, but yeah, good to see you too, Nellie. Wow, you look great. But yeah, having the experience with Jessica and Brent, and you know, in this field and in this life, you come across people that you meet, and you know, from different places around the world, and you meet them and you don't hear from them again. They're gone, and that's it, you know. But with the QLF family, man, you know, you can't get rid of Larry. You're always in touch with Brent and Jessica. So it's like a real family, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
QLF is not one of these organizations that's like, you know, that will jet you in and jet you out. They'll come in with the backpacking style, you know. But it's like it's real, and it's so like, it's one of the reasons why I think that, you know, we stay connected, because you know, you hear Jessica or Brent coming to town, or anybody from QLF, because it's a long-lasting relationship. It's not like something new you'll try and establish and then they're gone and you never hear again. But QLF has been consistent, has been dynamic in staying in touch, and you know, I mean, a real family. So we really appreciate that down here.
And the connection and the networking is I think very important. And for me, I value that a lot, because working in the conservation arena, I realize that we can never know everything, and there's several things that come up from time to time, and it's good to have QLF, and I know I bother Brent a lot when I have new issues at Zebra and I need help with this, you know, somebody who can help us, and sure, the connection is there, and that's really valuable.
Wonderful. Okay, we have time for a brief discussion on shared governance, and I go to you, Eddie, for that. And then we'll
Sure. Yeah, sorry. Definitely, as I mentioned earlier, being a country with problems of poverty, unemployment, and high debt. In fact, Belize has been in a debt crisis per se. The debt has just been highly unsustainable. It's very important that governance is shared and natural resource management is improved. In our case in Belize, we most of the protected areas are managed by nonprofit organizations through co-management agreements, and so at the same time we're looking at balancing economic development and conservation, and having that shared governance does lend us to do that. Belize is at a crossroad where you have to decide which direction you go. Having 60% under forest cover, 40% of forest under protection, where do we go? I mean, strict economic development destroys, and if you lock up everything, then you exclude the people and you exclude, and then you don't have economic development. But with shared governance, we can do that. At the same time, the government doesn't have the budget to invest in protected areas management. So government investment in protected areas management annually is very small. The nonprofit organizations invest a lot higher funds in protected areas management. So, and that's beneficial to the government, it's beneficial for the nonprofit organizations, and it benefits community development. Certainly, we were able to establish, I founded the Association of Protected Areas Management Organization, and that helped us to reach the government as a voice to improve protected areas management, because there was a risk of dereservation. There has been risk of dereservation in many instances. And working as a network, we've been able to prevent some of those. We've been able to ensure that there's a process in place that is more transparent, and to improve basically the legislation for protected areas management. And in terms of privately protected areas, then to ensure that that is included in the legislation for protected areas, which wasn't there before. And more recently, Program for Belize has been involved in a debt for nature swap between the government of the USA and the government of Belize, where $8.5 million in debt was forgiven by the US government, and now the government invested in protected areas management, terrestrial protected areas, and we're beneficiaries to that. That has allowed us to establish an endowment fund that has guaranteed permanent revenues coming to the organization for actual ranger expense for actual protection. And through PAMO, we were able to ensure that natural resources, protected areas management, is included in the long-term plan, in the Horizon 2030 plan. Whereas before, in the poverty alleviation plan, there was one line that said, ensure protected areas contribute to alleviating poverty, but there was nothing in place. There was no official recognition that Belize is in fact a natural-based economy. And so we ensure that that was put in place, and that has led to several things. One of them is the climate change, where we have now climate change projects. In our case, we have one that is saving over 4 million tons of carbon dioxide from being emitted into the atmosphere, released into the atmosphere. There's a new project, the Belize Maheia Forest Trust, that's another carbon project. And the other debt conversion to conservation, most recently, you probably heard of the Blue Bond, where the government was able to restructure the super bond, which was more than $500 million US, It was back at a discounted rate, almost 50% discount. And that has enabled the government to establish an endowment fund, a marine conservation fund, that will enable the country to move from 15% marine conservation to now 30% marine conservation. So basically, we will be meeting forestry conservation targets as well as marine conservation targets. And that has been possible because of the work and the support and the shared governance with the nonprofit organizations.
Great. So impressive. Thank you very much. And we have time for some concluding remarks from each panelist. And I'd like to start with you, Will. And could you share your thoughts on the future of conservation and where you find hope in this critical decade at this critical time?
Yeah, well, I think one of the great hopes right here is that QLF is alive and strong out there. It's a shoulder we could go to all the time. Thank you guys very much over there at QLF. But I believe that Belize, on a whole have done great and will continue to do great. And I believe that the Belizean people are speaking up more now when it comes to conservation to secure our resources for future generation. I believe, I know a lot of people have a lot of problems with social media. In our case, I think that social media has helped us a lot to get the word out so that politicians pay attention. It's important to hold politicians accountable these days. And through social media is one way that I see Belizeans have really been active in calling them out and ensuring that that they do what they're supposed to do. As this blue bond comes into effect, that we'll be having we should be getting more money for conservation. The challenge here will be to hold them accountable, to make sure that the money goes to actual protection and goes to enforcement, which I think is very critical, because we can't be out there in Glasgow talking about all the protected areas we have, and on the ground, there is no wildlife, So I think that all of us have a responsibility, whether we're here locally or nationally or globally. And I think this is where the network comes in, that we have to help each other keep an eye on our resources to ensure that future generations could also enjoy what we are enjoying today, or even leave it in a better state. I mean, just 20 years ago, you could go out and dive at the Sapadilla Keys Reef and there was not a chance that you would see plastic. And that's not the same these days. And that's just a short while. I mean, for some people, 20 years is a long time. But when you look at it, it's not a long time. And if you see these changes that's taking place, if we're not active, if we're not taking a stand, if we're not speaking out, if we're not causing trouble, good trouble that is, let's, we're going to be shooting ourselves in the leg. So I just think that, more education definitely is needed for people globally, but also especially here in Belize. I mean, we have some really good conservation laws, but hardly anybody knows it. I mean, one of the things that I have done over the years was started my own little TV show, little TV program called PGTV. It's small, but a lot of people learn a lot of things from it because we hammer in that message like Coca-Cola hammer in there and brand it that, it's illegal to catch the tarpon permit and bonefish. And now nobody can catch a tarpon bonefish or permit here in the Toledo district without our phone ringings or the policeman phone ringing. So it's little things like that that goes far places because we take a step to do the right thing. So yeah, I think that, we continue to do that and there's great hope out there.
Sure is. Thank you. Eddie, do you have any concluding remarks for us?
Certainly, I think sustainable development is something, and conservation is something we need to continue promoting. Certainly at Rio Bravo, our reserve, we manage 60% for strict preservation and 40% with buffer we use for sustainable development. Now that has to meet two criteria. One is the conservation criteria, that it should not have any significant negative impact on the biodiversity and environmental services of the forest. And the next one is that it should be economically feasible, so it supports the management of the reserve. So we look forward to promoting that. In our case, for example, the Virginia Tech University has done comparison of jaguars in the buffer area where we do sustainable development and the strict preserve area. And there's no significant difference. So it means we're doing it good. We're also certified by the Forestry Stewardship Council, another avenue of ensuring its sustainable development. So we need to continue promoting that. Private lands is more important in Belize at this time for meeting the protected areas gap. So that will continue to be an important area to work on. Certainly for us, we're looking at expanding Rio Bravo to ensure connectivity. And climate change is one of the areas. We certainly heard all the noise about the COP. Well, in Belize, it's real. And that's one of the ways we can guarantee that forest is protected. If we don't use that tool, we may end up clearing our forests and contributing more to climate change. And lastly, in Belize, our rivers are now under serious pressure. It's an area that has not been addressed properly. And so it's an area we need to work with, ensure forest, riparian forest corridor and reducing the contaminants going into our rivers in Belize.
Thank you. And to Jessica.
You're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. You'd think after 18 months of Zoom. Yeah, so many things to pick up on here, but I think I'd like to just kind of reflect on some of the points that have already come up about governance and the unique governance arrangements that we see in Belize, and scale, as Eddie reminded us, 430,000 people, and terrestrial area roughly the size of Massachusetts, though a much larger marine area, multicultural setting, and also how Belize fits into a broader intra-regional context in the Gulf of Honduras, and also its proximity to the Yucatan. So it is an incredibly complicated place in which so many things are happening. And in a sense, it's a window into the challenges of many places, of small island developing states, of Central American countries. It's also a window into what's possible. And there, you know, as several of you, Will and Eddie, have already highlighted so many success stories that I think, you know, we can learn from that. And I hope that Belize will serve as a model. I believe it will, not only in climate change mitigation, resilience, but also in meeting targets like the 30 by 30 pledge.
Great, thank you so much. Nellie, to you.
Yes, thank you, Liz. I think I'd just like to quickly reflect back on what both Will and Eddie mentioned or referenced earlier. You know, the new agreement for the blue bonds was only possible because of the coming together of partnerships, and I think that that's one of the things that even in the earlier intervention with Eddie speaking about shared governance, that one of the things that's has been sort of one of Belize's success stories is that there is strong partnership, public-private partnership that has allowed us to sort of move forward with some of these success stories. And so I am hopeful, you know, more recently with the biodiversity, you know, biodiversity has been more at the forefront globally, so to speak, more recently. And I am hopeful that Belize's policymakers and decision makers will fulfill their commitments to biodiversity conservation and, you know, continue to be enlightened as to the importance of these biodiversity conservation actions that are needed, sustainable use, but not only here in Belize, but globally. So yeah, I am hopeful.
Thank you. And finally to you, Brent.
Well, speaking of biodiversity, I think everyone's heard of the 30 by 30 target, the ambitious goal of 30% of the earth protected or conserved by 2030, which is actually less than the minimum that scientists tell us is needed for sustaining life. Hopeful is that if you look at a map of Belize simplistically, they're already there. But the target is not meant to be applied nation by nation. It's a global target. And in a recent ranking of countries according to their biodiversity resources and their carbon storage potential, out of 200 countries, there are only 17 that rank higher than Belize. So Belize should be aiming even higher than the 30% target. And I think from all of the things that you've heard today, and especially the people like the people who've been talking here today, I think that's achievable and can really be an example for the world.
Thanks so much. And I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all our panelists today for a most interesting, informative, and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you, Brent, for being our host, and Hannah Moore as our co-host behind the scenes. You haven't seen her yet. And also a special thanks to Bill Steelman, our producer, who has done just such a wonderful job on this series, launching the webinar series and thoughtfully and wisely managing it as well. And it's so important that we reach out to our friends and alumni worldwide with good news and goodwill. Please join us for our next episode on Thursday, December 16th at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. We'll introduce you to our conservation partners and alumni in South America. Thank you for joining with us today. Be well. Take care. See you soon.